So when it comes to picking the worst investor of all time, some of you might recall the guy who lost everything trading options. Or maybe some of you are thinking about Justin Bieber when he YOLO'd into a digital picture of a monkey. Well no, as bad as they were, you're actually wrong. The worst investor of all time, or maybe the most unlucky investor alive today, is actually just a frail old billionaire from New York. The Belfer family, whose name is quite popular among the art scene. Their name actually sits ahead above the New York Metropolitan Museum of Art. This family has been pretty unlucky when it comes to picking an investment. In fact, the investment firms that represent this family were recently included in a list of shareholders of the cryptocurrency exchange FTX and of course its US business. These documents were released in court this week as the FTX founder Sam Bankman-Fried has been accused by US prosecutors of orchestrating what's called one of the biggest financial frauds in American history, drawing comparisons to the Ponzi scheme of Berne Madoff and sprawling into bankruptcy with the likes of Enron. Enron, of course, which eventually sank amid fraud allegations. Now, many of you will be thinking, what? Just another old billionaire who's lost his ass in FTX. Well, unfortunately, not quite. It's actually much worse than that. FTX is actually just the latest loss in a mass string of disasters this guy has picked for his family when it comes to investing. In fact, the list of bad investments this guy has been involved in, well, you're gonna be shocked. And when researching this, I was only thinking that this really should be a movie, and I just can't work out yet if it's a comedy or a tragedy, because there's a lot to uncover here. And the guy himself, being honest with you, there's probably more to meets the eye, but I'll leave that investigation down to CoffeeZilla.
Thank you, CoffeeZilla.
Now, Robert Belfer, who currently heads the family, is a Polish-born son to Arthur Belfer, who was a multi-millionaire oil executive who fled his native Poland after the invasion from Germany in World War II. When his father, Arthur Belfer, came to the United States, he founded a company called Belco Petroleum Corporation and grew it to become a massive company. In fact, a Fortune 500 company. He eventually appointed his son to become his successor, and Robert was appointed president of the firm in the middle of the 1980s. Belco Corp then went on to merge with InterNorth Incorporation, and then this Omaha-based energy firm eventually merged with Houston Natural Gas and became Enron. Yeah, Enron. This guy was at the forefront of Enron, and he was invested into FTX. The Belfer family became one of Enron's largest shareholders, owning some $2 billion worth of equity. But in the early 2000s, Enron was once worth as much as $70 billion. It then declared bankruptcy after it learned the company's executives were using illegal accounting practices to hide some massive debts from its investors and creditors. The Belfer family is estimated to have lost about $2 billion of its investment when the company did indeed collapse. All of this according to estimates at the time. The real figure I guess we'll never know. Robert Belfer did play a high-profile role as a long-serving member of Enron's board of directors, and he continued to be a member of the board for several decades up until 2002. Now, Belfer Management, which I assume is an investment firm, is run by Robert's son, Lawrence. I think you can see this whole, Roman Empire passing down of titles here. But Lawrence Belfer actually came out and said that the family does not do interviews and declined to comment on several occasions when asked. So finding what their thoughts were and what their involvement was in any of these collapses is, pretty much impossible to find. Again, I'll leave that to CoffeeZilla. I dare you to tag him in the comments. But Robert Belfer himself was caught saying in 2011, needless to say, Enron was a painful experience, and the financial losses has forced the family to reduce their scale of giving. I'm sure we all feel sorry for the bloke right now. Now, ironically, where the story gets even more interesting between FTX and Enron is John Ray III, an attorney who was installed by the bankruptcy court to head the bankruptcy declaration of FTX when Sam Bankman-Fried stepped down. He was also appointed to clean up the Enron mess. And in November last year, Ray actually said the FTX scandal was much worse than Enron. He said, and I quote, "Never in my career have I seen such a complete failure of corporate controls and such a complete absence of trustworthy financial information as I have occurred here." Of course, he's talking about FTX being much worse than Enron. So now, this family, or this guy, Robert, should I say, has been involved in basically two of some of the biggest scams in recent living financial memory. And some of you might still be on the fence thinking, how unlucky has this guy been? Well, as Meatloaf said, 2 out of 3 ain't that bad. But what if it was 3 out of 3? What would you say then if this guy was involved in 3 mass scandals in the last couple of decades? If I was to ask you right now, and honestly, do this, play along kids, if you were going to pick 3 of the biggest scams in recent living memory in finance, I bet at least in the top 5, 3 of them would be the FTX collapse, the Enron collapse, and the Berne Madoff scam. In fact, I'd argue all 3 of them would probably be the top 3. And I know, you're probably thinking, there's no way this guy was also involved with Berne Madoff. And unfortunately, yeah, he was. The Belfers and Robert invested millions upon millions with Madoff, the former Wall Street executive who is now famous on Netflix, who was sent to prison after being convicted of orchestrating one of the biggest, largest fraud cases in history, and eventually passed away of natural causes. After the fall of Enron, the Belfer family withdrew more than $28 million from Berne Madoff's Ponzi scheme, right before it collapsed. Was this good luck? Was this just good timing? Or did they know something? Irvin Pickard, the trustee who was in charge of liquidating Berne Madoff's assets and recovering some funds for the victims, filed a suit against the Belfers in an effort to claw back some of their gains or even just any capital whatsoever. However, it's became increasingly unclear through my research that how this lawsuit actually played out and was it settled out of the courts. I really don't know. So let's just put this on ballpark paper before I get whacked. This dude inherited his dad's company, seemingly made 3 of the worst investments in living history, and we're supposed to just believe that. Imagine the circle he was involved in, being a millionaire back in the mid-50s and 60s, a millionaire's son. Imagine the people he's rubbing shoulders with in school and his network, the higher end of society. Knowing that, ask yourself a question. Do you think he knew about these scams? Or is he just one of the most naive investors ever to have lived? A billionaire that doesn't have a clue. I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments, and if you can help me out by dropping the code word, which is loser, it would greatly help me out with the YouTube gods. Be safe out there, and I'll see you next week.